Right. Our speaker today, I, I made you a co-host, Berke.
Sure.
Kayoko is a PhD student with Dr. Trung Lee, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, can you see my screen?
Yes, looks great.
So, my name is Berke, and I'm a PhD student in the ECS program. I'm working with Dr. Trung Lee from Civil Engineering Department. Specifically, we're working on open channel flows, and our title is the natural channel flows under open and ice coverage condition. And here's the outline of my presentation. I'll start with some introduction, describing the problem. I'll give some important literature related to our study, and then I will explain our planned contribution. Then I will explain our fieldwork, and it will include fall and winter measurements. Then I will show some data processing we have completed uh, from the collected data from the fieldwork stage. And then I will show some preliminary results from our computations and simulations. And I will conclude my presentation by explaining some further plans. So since we are working on environmental flows, the very first question comes up is that why do rivers meander? So we do not know the certain answer, certain generalized answer for every case, but we know that flow characteristics are affected. The velocity distribution, the secondary flow structures, they are affecting the meandering issue actually. So the next question in this case is the how accurate we can represent this velocity and flow structure in a natural channel. And the third question is more specific. In this case, what is the importance of the secondary flow structure, which is a very important fundamental on the sediment transport. Basically, I will explain in more detail, but secondary flow structure is a different kind of flow on the transverse direction, and that is affecting sediment transport a lot. Like it's changing the bed pretty importantly. And the last part is related to our contribution. So we will try to answer those questions under ice coverage. So that is a pretty new research area. It's you're not going to see a lot of research studies regarding those ice coverage case. So we will be trying to reveal some things regarding those questions when we have an ice layer on the surface. So I went into the literature and found some most recent and related studies. The very first one is pretty important and the most recent one. And because they are examining the effect of the surface ice with a new approach called two-layer hypothesis. And this is based on the Einstein's theory, two-layer. I will explain this one in upcoming slides. And the second one is Guo's method. He developed a new method to represent the velocity distribution when you have an ice on the surface, when it is totally frozen. This Guo has a method, it's a new method, 2017, to represent how the velocity should look. And the third one is the Chauvet's paper. Basically, this is one of the most fundamental papers in recirculation, regarding to explaining the recirculation and the secondary flow structure. Third one, Balan, actually the contribution that he did is performing his experiment on a topography, because most of the people are doing experiments in labs by using lab flumes, but they are using flat flumes. They are not using topography. So that's important because he revealed the effect of the topography. And the last one is important also because they performed multiple band orientations to understand the effect of the turbulence, actually the effect of band on the turbulence. Because natural streams are classified as the turbulent flows. So this is from Balan's paper, and this is the flume that he used in his experiment. You can see the contours in here. He has a topography, and he also performed LES. LES means the large eddy simulation. It's a mathematical model that I will show some details about that. And this is the representation way of his band. This is the streamwise velocity, and you can see the location of the maximum velocity by representing in this three-dimensional cross-sectional way. And basically, he's explaining, he's analyzing the effect of that topography on this velocity distribution. That was his contribution, actually. And this figure is for the TKA. TKA means the turbulent kinetic energy. Basically, it is describing the energy of the turbulence, energy of the fluctuation. And that fluctuation is high in his case, you can see close to the outer bank. And that is something very important because since we are thinking why the rivers are meandering, that turbulence is uh, causing the sediment transport. So it is changing the riverbed actually. So that's the reason this high turbulent kinetic energy is very important. And the other concept that I need to explain is the secondary flow structure that I have mentioned in the beginning. Basically, the secondary flow structure is a flow on the transverse direction. You can see the transverse velocity in here, and this y-axis is showing the water depth. And we have a secondary flow structure. This circle is showing the secondary flow direction. And basically, we only have resistance because of the riverbed. We don't have anything at the top. So this is the case when we don't have any ice. And in here, you can imagine that we have ice. Actually, you can see that we have ice. This figure is from the paper of 2020, the last one, the most important one for us, is that they are explaining how we can separate this entire body into two different layers when we have an ice. So they took the Umax as the reference in the middle. This is the maximum velocity, stream ice velocity. And we have two different layers. The first one, the upper one, is called ice layer. And in this case, the effective part is the ice because that is causing some resistance. And that's the reason we have a different layer in here. And the bottom part is because of the bed, like very same to this one. And the third figure, this part, you can focus on the second one, this one, and you can see how it looks like when we have ice. Because as you see, in free surface, we don't have any resistance at top, but we have in this one. So that's the reason we have two secondary flow cells when we have an ice. So that's something very important and affecting the entire bed change. So that's the reason it must be discovered. And in here, this is the another representation from the same paper. In this time, they are using secondary flow vectors in order to show the direction of the secondary flow. This one is when you have ice on the surface entirely frozen. You can see in here, you can see the directions of the vectors, but this one only shores, at the shores we have ice coverage. The middle is free surface. So you can see that it is completing the entire turn in here, but in here it's not completing the entire turn. So that movement change is also changing the bed alteration. So now, starting from this point, I will explain our study, what we have done so far, by explaining the fieldwork. You can see the Red River in here. This is the Lindenwood Park, and this is our study field actually. We have a kayak lounge in here. This is our starting point, you can see. So this is our upstream, because you see the flow direction is going through this way. That part is downstream, this part is upstream. And we have a bridge in here. Why I indicated that bridge? Because this is a reference point for us, and this bridge is providing us a lot of opportunities to make different kind of measurements. We can do stationary measurement with the help of the bridge. We can do cross-sectional. We can do everything we want because we have this bridge opportunity in here. And where we finish is this location. This is the end point for us. We have a dock in here. You see that small white. It's pretty small, but I bet you can see that. This is the location that we have gauge of USGS, United States Geological Survey. It's very close to the water treatment facility, and we stop in here. And the next step, actually, we didn't do anything about this band because this is the first band, this is the second band we have, and this is gonna be the third band, but we didn't do anything about that one. We will go upstream in future when we complete these two bands. And that's gonna be the third band, the last part of our field. So how we do our measurements? We're using a device called Sontec M9. As you see, this white part is the sonar device, and it is attached to that floating boat, and we have GPS in here. So basically, it is collecting data with the help of this, uh, including the coordinate system. So that's very important because we need spatial information when we are collecting data. And we have three different measurement methods. One of them is stationary measurement. Um, Sometimes we need stationary measurement only temporal because we want to measure locationally. That points information is important. And also sometimes we have to do that because when there is ice on the surface, basically you cannot move that boat because you don't have free surface. You cannot do kayak, you cannot pull that boat via rope, anything. You cannot do anything. So you need to open a hole on the ice, which is called station for us, and you need to collect data from that location. So sometimes it's mandatory to do this way. The other one is rope method because it's we didn't use this too much because our case it's the river is pretty wide, and it's not possible to pull this boat through the banks, and it's even if it is like possible to do one time, we cannot proceed to the next cross section because the vegetation is pretty dense. It's very hard to move actually while holding those ropes from both sides. But we did a couple times, especially for Buffalo River, we used this method. That river was narrow, so that was fine for it. But Red River is not okay for this. And the last one, which is the most common one, is the kayak. So basically, we're just tying this boat to our kayak, and we're going on the, we're just doing kayak on the river, and at the same time, it is collecting data. So that's the best way because we can follow any path we want. We can do a cross-sectional measurement, or we can do measurement for bathymetry. Now I will explain the difference of the cross-sectional measurement and bathymetry measurement. In here, this is one example from our fall measurements and specifically for cross-sectional measurement. You see the first figure. This part is the left bank, and this part is the right bank. So what we are doing is basically following the cross-sectional way through the other side while it is collecting data. And we do that at least 4 or 5 times for each cross-section. And the output is coming in this way. It is coming in cell, like with the information of cell. It is not like point recording. It is recording information of every cell in here in the river, and you can see the bathymetry shape of the bathymetry. And this is the bathymetry measurement that I have just mentioned. In this case, the shape of our path is not important. We just need to cover as much as we can because you see it's a natural river and the bathymetry is changing a lot. So we need to cover like the points as much as we can in order to have a correct topography at the end. Sorry. For the winter measurements, as I have mentioned, it has to be a stationary measurement, and you can see by using auger, we are opening some holes, and they are our stations. For this one, we cannot measure for a long time because it's pretty cold, and sonar device is just like getting frozen after some seconds. So that's one problem we faced. So that's the reason we had to measure for 30, 40 seconds at most. Then we have to take it out and like cleaning it and going back again. So that's how we collected data in the winter measurement. And it was pretty cold actually at that day, specifically that day. From very same day. So in the left-hand side, you see a figure. This figure is showing the velocity distribution, depth average velocity distribution on the surface, because you can see this is the 0 point, which is the left bank, and this x-axis is showing the distance from left bank. So you can see the river width is around 50, like close to 45 meters. And this red one is showing our winter measurements and others from fall measurements from different dates, from different days. And you can see that this figure is important in order to see where the maximum velocity is occurred. So it is close to the outer bank as we expected. But we cannot just expect, we need to show that because every natural stream has its own character. So we cannot be sure before plotting this. And this is just a general view of our measurements. You can see cross-sectional measurements, you can see a lot of like couple paths for each cross-section, because we did like at least 4 or 5 passes for each cross-section, and we are taking the average of it in order to have a correct cross-sectional representation. So you can see there are, I guess, 23 cross-sections in this part, in those 2 bands. And these trajectories between those cross-sections are showing the measurement for the bathymetry purpose. So you can see which parts we have covered. So in the data processing part, first we took, before starting any processing, we took the LiDAR data from North Dakota Water Commission. What is LiDAR data? LiDAR data is basically a point cloud for the topography, and they are scanning that area, that land, by using drones and helicopters. So that's red, that red zone is showing that point cloud. Since it is pretty dense, you cannot see it, but from the second figure you can see that 3-dimensionally actually. And the blue part is showing our trajectory. Now you may ask why LiDAR data doesn't have any point on the river. That's one problem, because LiDAR cannot penetrate through water surface, and we cannot see what is the bathymetry of this location. So that's the reason we had to do that measurement by ourselves. And you may ask, the other question might be that why LiDAR is important if we are working on river hydraulics, because the other environment is nothing to do with the velocity distribution or other hydraulic parameters. Now the answer is that the water surface is changing season to season. Sometimes it's going like pretty far from this riverbed. And that's the reason we need to know the topography of the environment in case of flood. Because we will see that we will simulate a lot of different cases, a lot of different water elevations, and in those cases, it's not going to stay in the riverbed, like the natural riverbed. It will go out. So that's the reason we need to know the environment. So after we merge the ADCP measurement with the LiDAR data, we interpolated that in software called TechPlot. So basically, TechPlot is interpolating. We preferred inverse distance interpolation method, and in order to have a smooth 3D surface. And in here, this topography is created from 3 million points. So most of them is LiDAR, and addition to our measurements. So at the end, we had 3 million points before interpolating, and this interpolation stage is taking almost 2 straight days in a very powerful computer. And why we are doing this? Why we created this 3D model? Because we need that, because we're running some simulation called LES, large eddy simulation, and that requires topography. For topography, that was okay, but how to represent the velocity components in our measured cross-sections? We did measurement on cross-section, but how we can see how the velocity distribution is looking like? So these blue parts are showing our passes. As you see, they are not straight, but the original cross-section, the real cross-section must be a straight line. So we're using a software that can take average of all those passes as a straight line. As you see, this is the black one. This is the average one of all those blue passes of ours. And basically, it is projecting the velocity components on that black line based on the location. So this software's name is Velocity Mapping Toolbox from USGS, and we're using to represent velocity distribution when we have a cross-sectional measurement. And you can see one example in here. This is the bridge location that I have showed, and you can see the maximum velocity. This is the depth average velocity at the right-hand side, and you can see the maximum velocity closer to the outer bank. Again, to emphasize, it's important to know where the maximum velocity is occurring. So, and the left-hand side, you can see the magnitude, velocity magnitude in a cross-sectional way. Again, you can see the highest velocity close to the outer bank. And basically, it's giving good agreement with this figure that I have just shown a couple slides ago. You can see the maximum velocity is occurring close to the outer bank, and like we can confirm that from stationary measurement in winter and cross-sectional measurement in fall. So for winter measurements, it's, as you can guess, it's not possible to take a cross-sectional measurement. So we had to find another method that I have just mentioned in the literature. Guo has suggested a method. So for that, basically, we're doing a stationary measurement. And you can see in here, in the first figure, the red line is representing the original data. This red line is showing the original data that we have collected. And you can see the original data again in here from these triangles. And Guo has suggested a method to create this U function, stream function, which is the orange one, orange curve, with his own method. It's a little complicated, but we were able to perform that. So we did this for every single station that we have. And this is the bridge location. We're just under the bridge right now in this image. So our stations are on the bridge location. And this is station number 3. So you can see the maximum velocity in here, which is 0.45 meters per second. And this is the station 5, which is closer to the middle, because like the station number 1 is on the outer bank, and number 2, number 3, we're just following, we're just going through the inner bank. So you can expect that station number 5 is around in the middle. And you can see that the velocity should be smaller than 0.45, and it is actually. So that's how we can create the locational velocity for each station, and we can create how it's supposed to look like. So that's how we did for winter measurements, specifically for winter measurements. And the last part for data processing is the creation of grid, because for the large eddy simulation, in addition to the topography, we need to create 3-dimensional blocks. So we did that. We created those blocks in a software called Pointwise, and they are structured grids because the code requires a structured and, if it is possible, a uniform grid. But since it is turning, it has a curvature in here. It is not possible to create 100% uniform block. It's not possible to do that. But there are a lot of parameters that we need to control, because a lot of things are affecting actually our simulation. Cell size is changing, the smoothness is changing, everything is changing, and we had to create this in a correct way. So 1-band was fine. 2-band was a little bit tricky, because you see we have one curvature turning through right and the other curvature is turning through left. After this point, when it is turning through the other side, then we're getting some problems. But I guess we completed that. It's running recently. So we started to get some results from this 2-band too. Actually, in the next slides, I will show some results from us for 1-band specifically, because 2-band is running right now. So before showing some results, I need to explain our method. So we're also using large eddy simulation, which is a mathematical model developed in 1960s to solve the turbulent flows in computational fluid dynamics. And basically, it is using the Navier-Stokes equation. Sorry. And you can see the Navier-Stokes equation in the right-hand side. This is the continuity equation. The change in time is 0. It's not changing in time. So that's the reason it is 0. And we have momentum equations in here on x, y, and z directions. This is in the Cartesian coordinates, 3-dimensional Cartesian coordinates. And this small u is representing the streamwise velocity. V is representing the transverse velocity, and W is for the vertical velocity. So these are different velocity components. So that's how we can calculate the momentum on each direction. And this is the model that we are using. This is more complicated and developed by my advisor in previous years. So it looks a little different. It's not same equation, but even though it looks a little different because it is not using Cartesian coordinates. You see, it is using the curvilinear coordinate system, which is a non-orthogonal coordinate system. So that's the reason it looks a little different. J is representing the Jacobian. So it has a lot of terms. And rho is density. P is the pressure, and tau is the shear stress. You can see in here. So that's the model. It's a pretty advanced physics model. And LES, the equations behind the LES, you can see in here. We have a shear stress in here, shear stress tensor, strain rate tensor in here, which is S. And we have eddy viscosity this time, because we had dynamic viscosity in here, but we have eddy viscosity in that one. and the CS is the Smagorinsky constant. So this is these are the equations behind our model. So the code that we're using is called Virtual Flow Simulator. And this figure is showing our block. This is just a representation to explain the code, to explain the block and how we get our results, how we can represent our results. This is just one example. I will show in more detail. So this is for the streamwise velocity distribution in all cross sections, in those cross sections. So we're running our code in CCAST, which is our university's supercomputing center, and also using Exceed, Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center. It's a pretty strong, pretty powerful computing center. This Exceed is, I think, one of the best in the world, I believe. And this code basically requires two basic files. One of them is the unstructured mesh for topography that we have created three-dimensionally. So we had to create the mesh for the river bed in order that code to follow our river, our channel, our natural channel. And the other thing was the fluid block that I have just shown you, one band and two bands. That was the fluid block. So those two files are required to run our code. And to explain how hard it is, how powerful, how much power we need, we're using supercomputing because you see, even with 40 CPU and plus 80 GB memory, and with 24-hour computation time, we had to repeat this successfully 3 times in order to have a fully developed flow. And what fully developed flow means, that I'm going to explain in upcoming slide. But you can imagine that even for one band, it is taking to get a fully developed result, like for the accurate velocity distribution, we need to run this for at least 3 days. And fully developed flow is required for a reliable velocity distribution for every single point. And how we can get a fully developed flow, what does it mean? Fully developed flow means, a developed flow means, let's say, is that the very first particle enters the system from our inlet should leave the entire system. And whenever it leaves, at that moment, you will have a fully developed flow. And for that, with the time interval is, when the time interval is 2 milliseconds, this is example from one band, it takes 90,000 time steps for that particle to leave the entire system. So that's the reason it is taking 3 days. It's taking straight 3 days to get that time step. And I have a video in here. You can see how it flows. Actually, this is the streamwise velocity distribution from platform view. You can see the particles. You can see cells are moving at each time step. And this region is actually this very first band. So this part is a topography that we have, and we have a fluid block on that, so that our code is actually running it in here on the correct path. And this is the same parameters, streamwise velocity. You can see the distribution. This is also a video in a different way, this time to explain that our simulation is three-dimensional. That's the reason I prefer to put that way too. You can see the fluctuation, velocity fluctuation in those cross sections, and the middle one is actually very close to breach location. And you can see why we have higher velocity in those two and lower, like relatively slower in this one. The reason behind that is it's getting pretty narrow at the breach location, so that's the reason the flow is accelerating. This is the turbulent kinetic energy in cross-sectional view. You can see in here, and also in planform view, you can see at the right-hand side. The turbulent kinetic energy I have mentioned, but to emphasize again, turbulent kinetic energy is very important because high turbulent kinetic energy means more fluctuation and more turbulence at that point. And more fluctuation, more turbulence means the more possibility for erosion, more possibility for the bed change, sediment transport. So it's affecting the shape of the river bathymetry, actually, affecting the geography. And you see, we observe the higher turbulent kinetic energy close to the banks, outer bank, mostly. And the other parameter is the vorticity. In here, you see the vorticity distribution from the planform view. And basically, vorticity means the spinning motion in the flow. It's the spinning motion in the flow. And again, it's an important parameter since it's spinning, like you can consider that as a whirlpool. And it's also important for the sediment transport again. And you can see we observe that vorticity in close to the bank locations. And this is the case when we have an ice on the surface. This is a video you can see in here how we actually create this video. How we can say that we have ice on the surface. Basically, we're just like fixing the surface velocity to zero, because when there's ice, it is zero. It's something stable. It's not moving. So that's the reason. Uh, that's how actually we run this different from the previous videos, from the previous cases, because they were for free surface, but this one is for ice. So the surface velocity is fixed to zero. That's how we create this animation. And the last thing that I'm going to share is that deepwater map. Deepwater map is a code script that turns satellite image. I'm explaining this under further plans because we learned how to use it. This is something very new. It's not an old method, and we know how to use it. We learned how to use it, but we didn't develop or we didn't contribute anything so far. But we are planning to integrate this to our study. That's the reason I explained it under further plans. So deepwater map is a code script that converts satellite images into binary images. So you can see in here, this is the satellite image from Sentinel-2 of the Red River. And this is the same image after we processed deepwater map code. So basically, it converts land to a black region, and it converts the water surface into white. So that's how we can separate that. And it has some disadvantages when it is cloudy, or sometimes when there's moisture on the soil or snow. It is getting confused, but it requires some additional developments. But this is pretty new and like pretty promising for our study. And basically, it is using 6 certain bands, and because satellite images have 12, sometimes more bands in their own, including the infrared, green, blue, this kind of bands. And this deepwater map is using 6 of them to separate land area and water surface. And we performed that deepwater map for our case specifically. This is the river part that we are working on. You will see from the shape. This is the Lindenwood Park, and this is the first band, and this is the second band. So what we have done, this is the point cloud from LiDAR, and this is the deepwater map output. So you can see the agreement when we scaled them. The agreement is looking pretty well. So that's the reason it is looking pretty promising. And for the last slide that I just wanted to put a diagram that is explaining our model in a very general way. So we started with data collection, we processed data, and then we processed data for the topography, for the LES simulation. And then we also use that data, we also process that for numerical methods, like the velocity representation and all other things that I have shown. Now in here, in the LES, we have 3 different band configuration, 1 band, 2 bands, and 3 bands. And for each band configuration, we have 2 different cases. One is ice layer, and there's ice coverage at top, and we have free surface. So basically, this is the LES part. And then for the numerical methods, there are like more complicated methods called Reynolds average, Navier-Stokes. Basically, these are Navier-Stokes equation, but derived for in time average way and for unsteady flows. So they are pretty complicated methods, and we can implement them. We can use them to create results, and then we can compare the results from LES and from URANS and RANS And then the last part is going to be integration of deep water map. We're still thinking how we can integrate that. Maybe flood management. I don't know. It's not certain right now, but we can integrate. We're planning to integrate this deep water map at the end after we made the comparison. So that is our planning for the future model. Thank you so much. I will be happy to answer your questions if you have any. You can see my email in here. If you have something later, then you can easily email me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Berkay.
Yeah.
If anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat or just unmute yourself.
Mhm.
I'll start with one. It's a pretty basic. So when you think about just the distribution of rivers that are ice covered versus those that aren't, was there some a priori reason you thought that ice cover would have an important influence on flow dynamics and how, and in terms of what the meanders look like, do the meanders actually look different between rivers, especially rivers that are maybe ice covered in one part of their region, but in another part are not?
Yeah, for the ice coverage, it's important because in such cases like we have in here, Fargo, or like Red River, they are frozen for 5-6 months, and compared to free surface, like it's a huge time. It's actually half. So it's their effect on the meandering and their effect on sediment transport cannot be ignored. And we saw that from previous papers, from current papers in the literature, that it is affecting in a different way, like you saw in the secondary flow structure. So the vectors, the directions are changing. So basically, the reshaping is going to be different under ice coverage. So we're not sure how it's going to be look like, how different it's going to be, but that's the plan that we're trying to reveal actually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Berkay. Thanks for your talk. That was really interesting, and it was fun to see an update on all of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have a question that you might have addressed, and so I apologize if this is something you said earlier, but when you're looking at an ice-covered river, is it a pressurized pipe flow, or is it still, can it still be modeled in the same way that a free surface river can be modeled, just with that solid boundary, or does it become pressurized or anything like that?
Like for the natural streams, are we talking?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not sure about that, but how can we answer that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that.
I guess kind of in the same way, like we know that sometimes the ice does hang too, right? Like there are places where the ice is above the surface of the stream.
Like air pockets?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Do those come up in your model, or is there any way that you?
Yeah, actually we didn't integrate that, but of course we observed that actually while we were like opening some stations on the ice, we realized that there are air pockets and they might be important on the velocity distribution and all other hydraulic components. But we did not integrate that because we did not went that stage yet. So, yeah, but it must be integrated. I'm pretty sure that they have a huge effect on the distribution and all other components.
I guess I'm not sure. I just am curious. And then the other side of it is also there's places where the ice never forms. Like on the Buffalo River, for instance, there's two reasons I've seen it. One is the water's moving so fast along a rock.
Yeah.
And the other one is, and Jim can maybe answer this question better. I think that river otters actually maintain holes in the ice. And so then you've got this weird effect where there's like places where the water is right against the ice, you've got the air pockets, and then you've got places where there's no ice.
I see.
And it gets so complicated, and I don't know how you address it in a model. I don't think you necessarily need to, but
now I understand, because we didn't consider that, because in our case we don't have this, like the entire portion that we're working on is totally frozen. So that's the reason we didn't think about that. But for Buffalo River, you're right. I agree. It must be addressed somehow.
It's gonna get weird.
So another complication in the question is when you have a transition between no ice and ice and back into it. So particularly when the ice goes out, you get a lot of ice dams, which block block the flow and create water backup and so on. And there's probably a lot of the erosional effects that occur during those times. Are there any plans to eventually try and incorporate those factors into your modeling? Or
Yeah. For specifically for that transition stage between ice and like free surface, like there will be a lot of like ice cubes like floating on the surface. So for that, specifically for that, we are planning to record a video right now. This is just the first step that we are planning to record a video at that stage to see their movements, like if it is changing, if it is different than the free surface, or how different it is than the free surface. Yeah, we're planning to include that too, because that part is going to be different from the full ice layer.
And also kind of following up on Stephanie's, some of those changes in the ice where you're getting the ice air pockets and everything are from it's frozen at one point and then the water level drops.
Mm-hmm.
So both with that situation and also during floods.
Yeah.
So as it changes in floods, you're also going to have to consider the changing topography.
Exactly. It's their effects are going to be different. They must be addressed. I agree. They must be addressed. Since we started to simulate ice case recently, because we were working on the free surface so far, and we didn't have a chance to collect data on the transitional stage. We don't have preliminary results about that stage, but we will have at the end of this winter.
Hi, Berkey. This is Xinhua Jia in the Ag System Engineering Department. So I have a quick question here that what is the main purpose for your study? I mean, your concern is on the flat water or on the flow conveyance? So what is the main goal?
Yeah, the main purpose is to just like in a very general way, to revealing the impact of this frozen surface on the riverbed, how it is affecting. And the other thing is that since they didn't reveal in the literature how the velocity distribution and like other hydraulic components are looking, so we are planning to provide this in a field case, because there are a lot of experiments, but people didn't do any field work because of the environmental conditions, because of cold. So that's going to be our contribution, and our main purpose is basically revealing the components and the bed change under full ice case, and also transitional case should be included and addressed. So that's going to be our main purpose.
So what is the application of your research?
The application of the research is like because since some rivers, not everywhere, but in very cold regions, yeah, at the end, I think I understand your point. At the end, this can be used in flood management and like for predictions maybe, because this sediment transport and the bed change is going to be affecting that, how frequent floods are occurring, or which regions are going to be under flood in a long term. So that can be used in that sense at the end. If yeah.
Well, thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. Thanks, Berkey. Enjoyed your talk, and everybody can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll stick around if anybody needs to talk with me.